Hello, everyone, and a really warm welcome to the first Women Plus Water lecture for 2024. I want to begin by acknowledging that all of us participate today from traditional territories of First Peoples across the country and around the world. Those of us in Saskatoon are gathering here today on Treaty 6 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis. The University of Saskatchewan is committed to honoring and supporting the Indigenous peoples, Indigenous cultures, Indigenous values, and Indigenous languages that belong to the land. From a more personal perspective, water is the lifeblood of peoples and societies connecting us. I pay my respects to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of the Saskatoon region and reaffirm our relationships with one another and with the land and waters that are so essential to our health and well-being. I invite those of you joining from other territories today to reflect on and to recognize the lands and waters that you call home, and to set an intention to have a productive and positive discussion today. I'm Corinne Schuster-Wallace. I'm a water health researcher. I'm the executive director of the Global Institute for Water Security here at the University of Saskatchewan and a member of the Department of Geography and Planning. And I initiated the Women Plus Water community back in 2018. For those of you joining us for the first time, Women Plus Water is designed to increase the visibility of women and other equity-deserving groups in water and engage people through the annual lecture series, the expert list, and an upcoming mentorship opportunity to learn about the gendered impacts of water research, management, and decision-making. Women Plus Water gives women, young professionals, and allies of all identities opportunities for professional development, while empowering a global network of water experts who are committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice in water. We have relationships that connect people across borders, elevate women's voices, and create space for innovative conversations that redefine inclusive excellence in water. In the last 6 years, over 3,000 people from more than 60 countries have engaged with the series, and we're delighted to continue to grow this inclusive community together with you and with your support. Additionally, our Women Plus Water expert list opened for registration just 1 year ago now, and we have over 140 experts on this public-facing list that's designed to connect you with people and opportunities to share your research and your expertise, your lived experience on gender, and all areas of water on your terms in spaces that are meaningful to you. If you haven't already registered, please visit our website, which will be in the chat. Each of our 4 lectures between January and April this year focuses on a specific water-related theme. Today's structured conversation focuses on SDG 6, Women and the Water SDG. While we may differ in the ways that we value and prioritize water, a commonality for all of us is that we interact with water every single day. When it comes to the Sustainable Development Goals, the reflexivity between SDGs 5, the gender goal, and SDG 6, the water goal, are such that neither of them can be achieved without the other. While water goal targets are preconditions for achieving some of the gender goal targets, such as eliminating violence against women, the gender goal targets are needed to be met to advance the water goal, such as effective participation in decision-making. And so for this reason, I'm thrilled that our first lecture of this year is between internationally renowned experts on this topic. And so without further ado, I'll pass the floor over to Stacey Dumansky, Outreach Specialist for the Global Institute for Water Security and Global Water Futures and Global Water Futures Observatory at the University of Saskatchewan. Stacey has been instrumental in growing and expanding this lecture series with the support of our advisory committee, Dr. Andrea Rowe, Dr. Helen Balch, Dr. Lalita Bharadwaj, Dr. Marcus Brinkman, Dr. Saman Ravazi, Dr. Leila Eamon, and now with the support of the College of Arts and Science here at the university. Stacey.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Corinne, for those opening remarks, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Just to kick off, I'd like to go over a few logistics for today's event. The event will be about 1 hour long, and it is captioned live for you today. So if you would like to access the captions, please click that CC button in the bottom toolbar and English captions will be visible. In past events, we have provided live French interpretation. And unfortunately, this year, for this event today, we're unable to provide that option, but we are working on securing it for our upcoming lectures. If you guys happen to know anybody who does French interpretation, please connect them with us and you can email us. We'll throw that email in the chat as well. So today the event is being recorded and we will be sharing it after on our YouTube channel and our website, and it will be available in English and in French. We'll have that translation for you afterwards. In the last 10 minutes of today's event, we will be having an opportunity for you to ask questions to our panelists. And please use that Q&A function in the bottom to submit your questions, and we'll draw upon those today to pose to the guests at the end of today's event. And then lastly, I would like to recognize our sponsors that help and support the Women Plus Water series. That includes the Global Institute for Water Security at the University of Saskatchewan, the College of Arts and Science, also at the University of Saskatchewan, and the Global Water Futures Program and Global Water Futures Observatories. And thanks for committing your resources to making this series a reality. And obviously to our virtual audience, thank you for joining us today and supporting this international community of individuals that are dedicated to water. So to move on, I'm going to give you guys a brief introduction to all of our esteemed guests that we have joining us today. I'll just do a brief bio for each, but their full biographies will be available on the website, and that will be also in the chat. So first up, I'd like to welcome Dr. Ginette Azcona. She will be hosting today's event. So Ginette is a senior policy specialist at United Nations Women. She manages the data and statistics for the UN Women's flagship reports, and that includes the Progress on Sustainable Development Goals, the Gender Snapshot Report. As a feminist researcher with over 15 years of experience, she's a champion of better data, evidence, and knowledge to advance a more equal, peaceful, and inclusive societies. So welcome, Ginette. Thanks for joining us today. Next up, we have Professor Joyashree Roy. So Joyashree is currently the founder director of the Center on South and Southeast Asia Multidisciplinary Applied Research Network on Transforming Societies of Global South, or SMARTS for short. She's also the inaugural Bangabandhu Chair Professor from 2018 to 2022 at the Asian Institute of Technology in Thailand. She was on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change panel when they received a Nobel Peace Prize back in 2007. And she continues as the coordinating lead author for the 4th, 5th, and 6th assessment cycles of the IPCC's Working Group 3. And she's been a chapter author for the Global Energy Assessment and is associated with many other global and national subnational reports. Joyashree has also published more than 165 peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters, and authored and edited other books as well. So welcome, Joyashree. Thank you for joining us. Lastly, we have Dr. Sherry Pictou. So Dr. Sherry is a Mi'kmaq woman from Litsiguk, which means water cuts through high rocks, known as Bear River First Nation, Nova Scotia. She's an associate professor in the faculties of law and management at Dalhousie University and holds a Tier 2 Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Governance. She is the principal co-investigator on a New Frontiers Research Fund grant called ARIMAT, the Biodiversity, Conservation, and Health and Well-Being of Indigenous Peoples. Dr. Pictou is a former chief for her community and the former co-chair of the World Forum of Fisher Peoples, and she currently serves as the first female district chief for the Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq. So welcome, Sherry. Thank you for joining us as well. So I will pass it on over now to our guests and hosts. So if you're good with it, Ginette, I'll let you take it away for your conversation today. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So here I am sharing the screen. Just let me know if you can see the PowerPoint slide.
You're great.
Perfect. All right, well, thank you again, Stacey, Corinne, and again, a warm welcome and thank you to all of you who have joined us today. I'm really excited to be here. I'll be kicking off today's discussion with a short presentation of findings from UN Women's latest publication entitled From Commodity to Common Good, a Feminist Agenda to Tackle the World's Water Crisis. The cover of the report you see here in this first slide. This publication and the research behind it are part of a larger program of work focused on systematically mainstreaming a gender equality perspective across all facets of the SDGs. The premise is simple. Gender equality cannot be siloed as a separate objective. It must be a priority for accelerating progress across all 17 goals, including, of course, the focus of today's topic, Goal 6. And simply anything short of that places the entire 2030 agenda in peril. And so really excited for us to delve deeper into this topic and to raise awareness of the importance of a gender equality perspective on water issues. Women with strong ties to the land and its resources have long advocated for a radically new perspective on water and development. One that recognizes, respects, and defends the rights of water and all living beings that depend on it. For too long, however, these perspectives have been marginalized and ignored. And so really what we are calling for with this report and with the work that we do is for a new path forward. One that acknowledges the voice of Indigenous women who have long advocated for an integrated approach to natural resource management, and one that unequivocally draws a clear connection between social justice, ecological rights, and women's rights, right? So really looking at these issues together and understanding the interconnection of these. To put it plainly, protecting water ecosystems and ensuring the rights and well-beings of women and girls go hand in hand. And thus to accelerate SDG 6, countries must also focus on accelerating SDG 5 on gender equality and vice versa. Since the mid-2000s, there has been a growing body of ecological jurisprudence at the national level focused on the rights of nature and codifying these rights into law, codifying the protections of these rights and rejecting the idea that water can be exploited, polluted, or damaged in the name of economic development. Instead, the focus is on recognizing the independent rights of glaciers, of rivers, and Mother Earth to exist free from human alteration, pollution, and harm. It's really, really important to recognize the role that women have played at the forefront of these efforts. They've been vital in bringing some of these reforms to the fore. And so recognizing their contribution and ensuring that they have the space to contribute is really, really important. I did want to give two very quick examples of some of these changes that we're seeing. Most recently, for example, in Bolivia, in 2010, they introduced within their kind of natural statutes rights that protect nature. The right to exist free from human alteration, as I said, from pollution, and from the negative effects of mega infrastructure. Anything that harms the existing ecosystem as being something that needs to be addressed and rectified. India similarly has been doing a little bit of this as well. The highest state courts have built a patchwork of laws recognizing the legal personhood statute of glaciers, of rivers, and of course of Mother Earth. In total, as of September 2022, 24 countries have formally adopted the rights of nature provisions in their legal systems. And again, really important to recognize the folks that have been instrumental in making this happen, women as well, or in particular, need to be recognized in these efforts. At the same time, and so while we acknowledge, the work that they're doing, we also must recognize that women remain hugely underrepresented in water management. In 2020 rather, only 26% of countries that completed the survey that we were looking at, and 170 countries completed it, so quite a large sample, said that they had achieved high or very high levels of gender mainstreaming in water resource management. So really quite a small number. 24% said that they were at kind of medium to high progress, and 50% of those that were sampled and that answered the questionnaire said that they had very low or medium progress in this area. So again, giving you an illustration of the challenges that we face in making sure that women have equal roles in resource management and are equally represented. The low representation of women, of Indigenous and local communities in water management and other decision-making bodies is a major impediment to transformational change. Voice, representation, and a seat at the decision-making table is really quite vital for the kinds of changes that we need. And this also, really important to also highlight the importance of having women and having representation and voice in the private sector. The other statistic that maybe I'll quickly highlight here is that in 2019, which is the latest available data that we had, only 24% of managers in large utility companies were women. Even smaller share when we looked at kind of smaller utility companies, 23%. And so really, again, showing kind of the kinds of inequalities that we see in this space and the need to rectify these issues. Over 2 billion people live in water-stressed countries where the demand surpasses supply. Women with unequal rights to land are made even more vulnerable in this time of crisis and in these contexts, as water rights are often tied to land rights, and women oftentimes have far less access to land and land rights in many, many countries. Globally, despite the really important role that women play in agricultural production, globally they own about 14% of agricultural land. It goes without saying that this in turn also impacts women's livelihood and their vulnerability to poverty and hunger. And so this figure that you have here is just an illustration across countries in terms of the inequality that you see. Women represented here by trees and their kind of, access and share of land ownership and men's. And as you can see, in many, many countries, very large differences and disparities, which again then tie to land rights, to water rights as well. Water stress exacerbated by climate change is expected to worsen in the coming years. And so things are not looking like they're getting better. In fact, we're going in the opposite direction. In 2023, an estimated 380 million women and girls were projected to live in countries with high or critical water stress. This number, if we continue in the current trajectory, is expected to increase to 471 million by 2030. And to 674 million by 2050. Severe weather events are also expected to increase in frequency and duration. Recent projections show that the number of drought days could increase by more than 20% in most of the world by 2080, while the population exposed to this phenomenon could grow by around 9 to 17% by 2030. And by around 50 to 90% by 2080. Already, some 37% of the world's female population live in contexts with high or very high exposure to droughts. And so the situation is already dire and expected to worsen in years to come. Among the most vulnerable to water poverty, to climate change, and to a worsening water crisis are women and girls at the intersection of compounding forms of socioeconomic inequality. We looked at data from about 93 countries for which we had access to intersectional data, mostly low and middle income countries. And when we disaggregate that data by sex, by income, and location, we see huge differentials in terms of access to improved water resources, ranging from low inequality of less than 1%, percentage point rather, to as high as 82 percentage points, right? The difference here is looking at the dark diamond is looking at the national average. The lighter diamonds here, kind of the aggregates for the rural poorest, or the urban riches rather. So here's access to improved water. And then this diamond here is for the rural poorest. And as you can see, large inequalities that are actually invisible if you only focus on the national average, right? Which we tend to do often when we're assessing progress on these issues, and then actually miss the huge inequalities that exist within countries. The ripple effect of these deprivations are multifaceted and include, for example, more time poverty. To give an example, in Malawi, women without safe drinking water in their households spend on average 54 minutes a day collecting water, while men spend 6 minutes. And across countries, we're hearing and seeing evidence of climate change, of worsening water crisis impacting women's time poverty. We also see an impact on health. Every year, an estimated 660,000 women lose their lives prematurely due to unsafe water sources, using unsafe water sources, compared to an equally high number, but lower number for men, 570,000. We also, the research and the evidence also makes clear that women in these contexts are more exposed to violence, including higher incidence of domestic violence, but also greater exposure to interstate conflict, to forced migration and displacement. And so, again, the impact of water crisis, of water poverty, and other dimensions of well-being are real and manifest in many different ways across countries. The report that I mentioned goes into many more details. I only have a few minutes with this presentation, and so please have a look if you have a chance at the full report. We do include in it 9 recommendations, ranging from a call to end gender-based discrimination and other forms of discrimination which exacerbate inequality in access to water and sanitation, but also enacting measures that promote women's equal leadership in water governance and management. Water projects that include women are more effective. The evidence shows that, and so let's make sure that they are there and represented equally. Among other recommendations is a call for more investment in gender data to inform water and climate policy, including data on the impact of water and climate crisis on different groups and subgroups of women and girls, and those most likely to be at risk and left behind. And so we need to make sure that this evidence is available, that it's informing policy, and that it's being collected. And importantly, that it is suitable for looking at these issues from an intersectional perspective. The codification of the rights to nature approach into law is one concrete way in which harmony with nature is being promoted and enforced at the national level. And I gave you a little preview of some of the things that we found and included in the report. Really important to continue to move in that direction, but also really important to include and to ensure that there's an inclusive participation of women, of Indigenous groups, local leaders, and community members, to ensure that these fundamentally distinctive approaches to resource management live up to their full potential and bring about the needed structural change in natural resource management that we're looking for. For women and their communities, the fight for social justice, including gender equality and environmental justice, go hand in hand, as I said, with the struggle for water rights and climate protection. Too often, these issues are given lip service, but not truly addressed in an integrated way. So more efforts are needed, not only to see these issues as interconnected, but to address them in an interconnected way. I'll stop there. I think I'm very likely out of time, but if you are interested in hearing more and seeing more of the evidence and the data that we compiled globally and across countries, I'm just putting up very quickly the QR code for this particular report, and so you see it on the screen. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to my fellow panelists for their remarks and presentation. I will start with Joyashree. So Joyashree, you have the floor. As you're giving your presentation, maybe kind of a question to guide it. How does access to clean water intersect with gender equality? And why is it important to consider gender in the policy and programming work related to the goal 6? Please also share, if you can, what inspired you to focus your research on the intersection of water and gender. Why is it important to look at these issues in tandem? So with that, thank you, and over to you.
Thank you, Ginette. And let me share my slides, and let me go to, okay. Yes, and yeah, what I'm going to share with you is some of my lived experience also, and what motivated me to come and work in the field of water. So I just wanted to say that, are you sharing the slide? Yeah. So yeah, what I wanted to say is that in hindsight, when I I look back and then I see that my motivation came from my lived experience during my early days of growing up. And then my training in economics and environmental economics really helped. I was growing up in a small town in Shillong, which is in India, in the northeastern part of India on a hilltop. And I saw everyday living struggle for many people there to access adequate quantity and quality of water on demand. Due to the terrain, that was the topmost priority in household to ensure safe health and hygiene. But some households could afford to get water delivered in their doorstep by the water vendors, and some had to travel hill tracts to fetch water. Given the high altitude, we needed hot water almost all year long. That was also an affordability question. So when I started measuring in economics, in hindsight, again, I realized two things. The water access problem I observed was more of a public investment problem in infrastructure to provide access to safe water service for various household chores rather than of resource availability, because resource was available in abundance. You can see from these waterfalls, there were waterfalls all over the town and the cities, in the villages, everywhere. But the other thing which I also observed was that if we think in our early ages of growing up, basically what we have is our time budget, right? 24 hours time to allocate for our skill building, education to secure a future career. But looking into the everyday lived experience in developing country context at that time, it became almost a stereotype in my mind that building of a water infrastructure is a man's job, and the making provision for safe water for household chores is a woman's time commitment, but this is not a job, right? And then least time is left for them to devote for empowering themselves through education and skill building. So then I moved to a mega city of Kolkata for doing PhD in the state of West Bengal on resources, energy, and environmental economics. I got exposed to another major problem this time around, where water quality was a problem because 50% of the state of West Bengal had naturally occurring arsenic in groundwater, and which is major source of drinking and irrigation water. And use of arsenic water enhances chance of cancer by a factor of 1,000 times. Now, if we look into, I got into the research for arsenic-related human well-being and welfare impact. And what I also realized was that the public investment in water infrastructure and technology was not yielding results, as they were not addressing the societal need. That made me to undertake a study to quantify the human welfare loss from drinking arsenic-laced water way back in 2000. And then I collaborated with engineers who invented new technology. And a long story cut short, what we did was we tried to devote some of our time for social embedding of the infrastructure. And that brought our team to win in 2012 Prince Sultan bin Aziz Award for Water. But in more recent years, so what we did, we chose a school and where we gave a modern technology and modern water dispensing units where they could use the cards to get the water through the ATM water disposal.
Apologies. It seems like Joyashree might have a bit of connection. Oh,
Was we in how energy sector. So in 2016, we started working on IPCC 6 assessment cycles special report on 1.5 for energy sector on all 17 SDGs. Results show that sector will have the sector gets transformed. And so which means there needs to be get energy supply changes or transformation changes. Report we made assess the large number of individual research that are getting published worldwide, and worked on undertaking the synergies and trade-offs between climate change adaptation options and gender equality. We included as adaptation category water and sanitation. In urban settings, we found some positive links as men and women are responding to water scarcity through adaptation actions, such as small rainwater harvesting systems, storage tanks, gray water recycling system, etc. Even if it is not gender responsive in design, long-term benefits are significant as higher education for women is correlated with reduced incidence of diarrhea, mainly due to an increase in awareness. After 6 decades also, when I look back into the rural areas in India and many developing countries, what I observe is that what I saw in time of my growing up has not yet been solved, which means that the absence of infrastructure to reduce water scarcity and improve access to sanitation and hygiene facilities are creating maladaptation. And also we must not forget that plight is more if women are from poor families, from marginalized social group, and researchers have not yet even solved or studied the whole spectrum of gender coming out of male-female binary. So there is huge research gap as well. And if we want to leverage the adaptation actions for gender equality, we need to go beyond the SDG 5 indicators, because SDG 5 indicators do not comprehensively consider the intersectionality. And so what we need, I'll just give you an example that in India, the gender intersects with caste, wealth, and religion, and explicit attention to other inequalities along with the gender inequality, is in project design is a key factor. And what we found was that if we really want to know how the projects are addressing the gender equality, then we need to focus on 29 more gender-related targets, which are within the other 11 SDGs. So we need to go beyond SDG 5 to understand how the projects can benefit the gender equality. So I feel that it's extremely important how we consider the progress in water sector and the gender equality question. With these words, I'll stop here now, and then I can come back during the question answer session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joyashree. That's really, really powerful and important information that you shared with us. I also really enjoyed hearing the background, the history and your personal interest in this topic as it relates to your childhood. Our next speaker, I'm going to turn over to Sherry. Over to you for the same question. Why is it important to consider gender in the policy and program work related to SDG 6? What inspired your research and your passion for this work? If you can share a little bit of that as well, that would be great. Over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm just trying to, can everybody see that? Yes?
Yep, we're
Okay,
good, Sherry, thank you.
fantastic. So I'll go through this. I know we're short for time, very briefly, but I just wanted to say, highlight a little bit more where I'm from. I'm with the Mi'kmaq Nation, and this is sort of the central map is a map of my ancestral homelands, Mi'kmaq, that runs through several provinces in here in Canada, on the East Coast. And of course, you see that upper map. This is was a traditional use study, and the big, huge dark dot, that is the reservation, that is the reserve. But if you go back to the central map, these were my ancestral homelands, and we had these 7 traditional hunting districts. And this is very much how I was raised. When you look at the women and the children on the beach, and that's very much how I was raised. And I often think about, I'm really telling my age, because I was brought up for the first 7 years of my life where we had to lug water, and we didn't have no plumbing and so forth. And so I have a deep appreciation for water in so many aspects. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this concept of sustainability and how, Indigenous governance and Indigenous gender issues kind of intersect from that Indigenous feminist perspective. If we had more time, I would go into why we have to qualify feminism as Indigenous feminism. But I want to start out with the Mi'kmaq concept from my elder and Dr. Albert Marshall and his late wife, Dr. and Elder Medina Marshall, who had this concept of Etuoptimik, two-eyed seeing, and another concept, the Netuglumuk, in our language. And this is sort of how we governed everything. And there's different definitions of it, but I think this quote really encapsulates it well, that Elder Albert says, we have inherent responsibilities for ensuring that no action that we will take will ever compromise the ecological integrity of the area, because our overall objective is to ensure that the next 7 generations will also have the same opportunities as we have, and hopefully better opportunities than we have, of not just being able to sustain themselves and harvest the gifts from the Creator, but also be able to enjoy and learn from her. I love that. He's talking about Mother Earth, but I love this being in the same sentence as Creator, and just as our ancestors have learned from her. It's a wonderful quote, and that kind of encapsulates a very much of a relational approach. But of course, as we know, why can't I go ahead? Okay. Throughout time, colonialism has, has deeply impacted of how we do governance. And so I I picked these up a few years ago, but the sustainability, the hijacking that from or borrowing it from Wiki, is here's the definition: is the capacity to endure in a relatively ongoing way across various domains of life. And it goes on like it's supposed to have these interconnected domains of environment, economy, and society. And as we know, that's not always the case, as we heard from the other presentations. I do really like this International Institute for Sustainable Development. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now that sounds very similar to Dr. Albert Marshall's notion of sustainability. But often what happens, as you've heard from the previous presentations, is that we have these relational worldviews and Indigenous economies where all of life, we have this, I should change that. That's the wrong slide, actually. My students pointed out, why is there a little man there? I have another one that's a little bit more circular and inclusive. But it's a holistic concept where everything is our relative. We have this saying, Sid Nogama, all my relations. And I found that this is, different contexts around the world, but very similar in spirit. But unfortunately, what happens to Indigenous people, they are dispossessed from the land and waters. And if we talk about Indigenous rights or any form of development, it seems to be, pressured by these two alternatives: real neoliberal exploitation, usually resource extraction on one end of the pendulum, or a fortress, no human footprint approach to conservation. And if I had time, I'd go into a little bit more about conservation refugees and so forth. And this is the dilemma that we constantly find ourselves in. And so I think that this is an issue with the SDGs as well. I know from a research academic perspective, when we put in proposals that we have to focus on, certain SDGs and so forth. But as I was expressing to my colleagues the other day, one of the major frustrations I have when it comes to gender is that a lot of proposals and a lot of projects will aspire to, we're going to include a gender-based analysis, or we're going to include gender, and yet they will not be inclusive of SDG 5. And I know that this webinar focuses on SDG 6, but I think it really interrelates to all of the SDGs and other forms of water, like the SDG 14 and so forth. So they're very interconnected. And I must point out too, from an Indigenous perspective, when the SDGs were first developed, there was little inclusivity of an Indigenous peoples. And so for the last 30 years, there's been a big movement amongst Indigenous folks to say, hey, all of these SDGs apply to us, not just a couple. And so this is an excellent article, The Sustainable Development Goals and Indigenous Peoples, Another Missed Opportunity, ? And basically, they're calling on for more indicators that reflect Indigenous philosophies, the lived realities of Indigenous communities and their struggles to control their lives, as opposed to what happens now, prospective governments and I would say even the economic sector as well. In the indicator production is a political process, and it aids decisions about where to best allocate resources and to be accountable for public monies and scrutinies. And so these two are really a dichotomization, if you will, or a dichotomy. And how do we balance those out? And I just want to honor Josephine Madaman, who had passed away in 2019, that started the water walks here in Canada, and brought a lot of attention. And of course, Autumn Peltier, who's now all growing up, but has been one of the youth spokespeople for water. And so the issue that I find and where my work centers on now is these recognition and inclusion politics, if you will. And this is starting to infiltrate Indigenous communities. And what you see to the left there is that this concept of gender-based analysis plus, which is basically a government policy in terms of to ensure there's more inclusivity and so forth. And this is starting to penetrate through some of the governmental departments that are responsible for Indigenous peoples in their plans and so forth. But the problem with just a gender-based analysis, if you don't take into the concept of intersectionality, which is well known in feminist literature, intersectional feminism, but even with that, where we take into consideration things like race, class, culture, gender, and so forth, is that this concept that's been developed here in Canada and North America, this concept of settler colonialism. And colonialism is a very difficult concept to project in modern times, but what we mean by that, and we do know that all settlers are not equal, that there are contemporary forms of colonialism. We're still feeling the impacts of historical colonialism, but there are contemporary forms of colonialism within what is supposed to be a post-colonial state. I've had more times. And so ironically, here in Canada, we had the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's File and Inquiry Report, where women and young girls and gender diverse people are at risk of being murdered or going missing some 6 to 12 times, particularly in the north, than their Canadian counterparts. And yet at the same token, they seem to be the first fighting on the front lines, fighting for rivers, lakes, and oceans. And it's not easy. This is where we see that pressure between, with economic development. And there seems to be a creation of a hierarchy of rights where the economic enterprise, regardless of the environmental impacts, seems to supersede any Indigenous or human rights, and particularly the rights of women. And I think one thing that we tend to forget when we talk about development and we talk about development in Indigenous peoples, we tend to forget that colonialism that I was just speaking about is internalized in many ways and has been imposed on our communities. And I don't know if this is why Indigenous women are to the front, because they haven't benefited from that system, because it's been a very patriarchal colonial system and so forth. And so the diagram to the right is the situation of where we find ourselves. We have these drinking water advisories, long-term in Indigenous communities. We have resource extraction, and gender has to be taken into consideration. And how does that intersect with Indigenous governance? If I had more time, I'd spend more time on that. But this is why Indigenous feminism is so fundamentally important, because all the opportunities, or all, I wouldn't say even opportunities, the options available to us are very male-centric and not really good for the health of bodies or the environment. And so I'll just bring your attention to an article that came out just this year. It's a wonderful article and many authors called Water Back. And this was brought out in response to, there's been so much focus on land, and us as Indigenous people, when we talk about land and land back, and we're talking about really the relationship, we're not talking about property ownership there in the conventional sense. We know that includes our water, but because of a number of issues that are too complicated to explain, there needs to be this attention on water back. And they come out like, they did research where there has to be rematriation, reclamation, and restoration. And the key findings when they did their literature review approach was how central waters to Indigenous lifeways, the impacts of colonialism and water injustice has to be taken into consideration, and there needs to be more collaborative and holistic approaches. And just almost ending here, I just wanted to bring your attention to the blue economy. And for years, with my work with the World Forum of Fisher Folks, this is well known, this blue economy, and in many ways it's been analyzed as another ocean grab. But there's so much now going as the ocean is the new frontier for the economic development. And I'm thinking, what can you possibly get out of the ocean more that you haven't already? And anyways, back to Elder Albert Marshall, he was saying how the ocean is so important because it's our last source of survival. And I said, why did you say that, Elder Albert? And he said, because they've cut down all our forests, which is very interesting. And so again, just to highlight that this is some of the struggles that we have with gender, and we have to take into consideration, rather it's ocean, land, because to me, they're all interconnected, particularly when you have water advisories that are connected to resource extraction and the pollution of the resource extraction, and the same would be for the ocean. And finally, I'll bring your attention to this. This is free. It's a wonderful, wonderful dance by a young Mi'kmaq girl, Sarah Prosper, and it's called Samgwan, which means water. And I really encourage you. It's an artistic expression of dance, song, and poet, and so forth. A wonderful, wonderful that brings into all of this aspects of water. So Sidnogama, all my relations, Wilalio, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sherry. There's so much that I want to ask you, and such great thought-provoking interventions that you've made just now. So really appreciate all of the information you've shared. Particularly, I want to say something that comes up a lot in my conversations with our stakeholders at the global level. What gets measured gets treasured. And unfortunately, oftentimes, the data that's being used by policymakers, particularly at the global level, is not looking at these issues from an intersectional perspective. As you rightly point out, many of the indicators do not call for a lens that allows you to look at how these issues are impacting Indigenous peoples and making sure that their challenges are being raised and addressed, right? That the evidence is then informing policy, and that the evidence simply exists, right? And making use of it. And so thank you for that, and many other things that you raised in your interventions. I'm going to turn it over back to Joyashree with a kind of a question to kick us off. I think all of us have talked a little bit about the impact of these issues on women, on Indigenous women, on different groups of women. But if we can talk a little bit more about the impact specifically on women's health, on education, on economic opportunities. I think you've heard from all of us that these issues are interdependent, are interlinked, and oftentimes we don't talk about them enough in this way, in this kind of interconnected way that is so crucial. And so maybe over to you from your research in India and elsewhere, what are we seeing are the impacts on different dimensions of well-being as we see the quality of water being reduced, as we see some of these issues being neglected to the point that really, as I said in my presentation, we're seeing actually a really unfortunate kind of negative trajectory in the future unless we take action. So maybe over to you.
Yeah, I would say that, as I said, as an economist, we talk about whether you have a money budget or a time budget, right? So if you have the time budget and most of it goes for fetching water and making sure of the family health, then you do not have time to invest on yourself. So it's the women who are losing any time or money invested on their well-being, right? Whether it is health, education, empowerment or raising their voice or anything. The second thing which I'm observing now is that as the water is becoming more and more available through infrastructure development and through market economy, the women who had the empowerment of water allocation for the family health, at least that gave them some kind of decision-making power within the family, that also they are losing. Right? So basically, the technology is providing the solution, but that is also excluding women. And simultaneously, the women are not provided the access to education or some other, the empowerment issues. So basically, what is happening is that still they are, I'm talking about these women who are from marginalized group, who doesn't have wealth, who doesn't have the asset position, or they do not have the asset ownership, or they are from different caste or religion. So there are multiple ways of marginalization, which we are calling intersectionality, right? So marginalization happens for multiple reasons, just not because you were for the gender perspective. So low income and everything. So that intersectionality is making the women, and not only women, the other gender also, which we are not even studying at all, as I said, So that is also extremely important. And I just feared that the historical inequity is going to be even more stressed due to these gender blindness of many mitigation and adaptation actions. So it means that there is going to be even more regression of those population. So which worries a lot. And I think we really need to focus on that. Sometimes we talk about the gender issues, but that also sometimes gives more prominence to those who are advantageous, right? So we really need to be focusing more in terms of the intersectionality and how that group can be really brought up if we are talking in terms of leaving no one behind in the development process.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, what's really interesting is that when we talk about leaving no one behind, the question is, who are we talking about? We need to do more research on why these different groups, as if it's new, as if this is something that isn't, at the root of it, really speaking to historical inequalities, to a historic disempowerment of different groups. And that when we're talking about gender equality, that we have to recognize women are not monolithic. And that if you really are serious about taking a feminist approach, it has to be an intersectional approach. And how important it is to have that evidence. The data that we've analyzed across countries, when we only stick it to the national level, or when we only disaggregate the data by gender, it tells us one trajectory. And in some cases, it's actually a positive one. Women are seeing, overall, as an aggregate, an improvement in access to water in countries where even access to clean water was very limited. But when you disaggregate that data by race, by ethnicity, in addition to gender, by rural, by location, right, urban, rural, and by the intersection of all three, you actually find that the trend, that trajectory is very, very different for those, groups, right? That actually you could be seeing a reversal, that is being completely hidden from the national average. It tells you the opposite progress story. And so really, really important to think about these issues again from a very intersectional perspective, and from a perspective that goes beyond gender and looks at these issues holistically. With that, let me turn it over to Sherry. Your point about an Indigenous perspective, what we mean by Indigenous feminism, is really, really important, right? What does that mean? And how do we bring those perspectives to a global audience? What we find is that oftentimes a lot of this work is happening in academia, it's happening among activists, and it's not reaching and it's not getting the attention that it deserves among global leaders. And so how do we break that disconnect? And again, why is it so important? I think picking up on Joyashree's points to take an intersectional perspective on these issues. Oh, and you're muted, sorry.
I said, wow, I don't know what to comment on there. That is so loaded, but I will just briefly explain why I foreground feminism with Indigenous perspective. And a lot of that becomes because we know universally or across the globe, you know, mainstream feminism didn't really impact other marginalized groups of women and gender diverse folks. And that's why I say it has to have that indigenous perspective. And the second reason why I bring forward the concept of Indigenous feminism and analyzing any policy or is because that imposed patriarchal system of governance, and that is very neoliberal. And what I mean by that, there's such an overdependence on the economy. And as we know, the economy is very male-centered in so many ways. And this is where the analysis in my mind, where intersectionality comes in, is okay, if this is improving the economy, but who's really benefiting from that economy? That's the issue. And secondly, is that type of development necessarily good for the water, for the land? And we have so many contradictions within this particular country. We have these long-term water advisories, some directly related to resource extraction, and yet there's this hierarchy that puts corporate rights up here and that we are exporting water. And so that's where I think the type of analysis. So when we talk about sustainable development, I'm not sure if it's around inclusivity or equality, because I always pose this question: why do we want to become part of a system that caused the inequality to begin with? Now, that's quite complicated, because I do know that, oh yes, we should have those fundamental human rights as everybody else. However, for Indigenous rights to participate or exercise our rights, or here in Canada, our treaty rights and so forth, it seems that only the neoliberal option is available. And why is that?
Oh my goodness, so powerful. Let me see where I interject with that. Improving the economy. I mean, can we think about a different way of structuring our economy? That doesn't mean the destruction of our natural resources. Is that really economic development, when future generations, as you highlighted so eloquently in your PowerPoint, is so crucial and so essential for the definition, right, of what we're trying to do here in terms of sustainable development, is to ensure that we leave the world better for future generations, and that we don't, for the sake of economic development, destroy our resources. So how do we really change that mindset? And I think that, as we did our research and saw what was happening in many countries, right? So not just in Latin America, where there are many examples of changes happening at the constitutional level to codify the rights of nature, but in many other countries saying, no, this trade-off and this hierarchy of priorities that says that, yes, we will allow this for the sake of economic development. We're no longer going to support that argument and allow these horrible things to happen that have huge impacts on the well-being of our people for the sake of development. And so really, really powerful and important that we raise this in today's discussion. I see, Joyashree, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I just want to say, given my training in economics and environmental economics, what we have been teaching all the time over these years is that when we are talking about that why women are left behind in the economic development, basically when we are talking about this intersectional group, actually they are in the informal sector. That means which is falling outside the market economy. And our economic development right now is measured by market economy based activities only, which is the GDP indicator. So the GDP indicator is excluding this whole informal sector. I always give an example, say, think of my mother or millions of such mothers in all these countries where they are providing to the family 10-star hotel facility, and none of their value addition into the nation building and national product building is being accounted for in the GDP. That's why these countries are poor, right? They are shown as poor. So they are shown as backward. But if you consider this correctly, if you correct your GDP indicator, if you augment your measurement of GDP indicator by including this non-marketed value addition within the society, then your fund allocation in the mainstream will be very different. These people will not be left behind in that case, right? So they will also have a voice there. So just from economic perspective also, I just feel that we are measuring and we are reporting an incomplete indicator of GDP. I don't say this is wrong, but this is incomplete to encompass all the activities in many of these informal sector. So this whole, just imagine in many countries of Africa and South Asia, 90% people work in the informal sector. That is not being included in the whole accounting system. So there is a major flaw, and there have been discussion from the environmental economists for a very long time to correct that, but that is really not happening. So there has to be a major movement for correcting this.
Yeah. Again, it goes back to what we value, right? It goes back to many things that are so important being kind of ignored and unfortunately not valued the way they should. And women's time is really what I think you're talking about as part of the informal economy. Is something that, historically and to this day, I have to say, is undervalued, underrecognized, underrepresented in these discourse, right? So I know that Stacey's coming in. Do I have time for one more question, or do we open it up for the Q&A?
I think okay, good. I think we're going to open up to one of the questions from the audience, if that's all right with you three. There was an excellent question from Noelle. So her question was, what have you found most surprising about the research and work that you do? So I'm going to open up, just going to go through my screen. I'll start with you actually, Sherry, if that's okay.
Sure. I think, I'm discovering something new all the time. And let me just put it this way. I'm a latecomer to academia, and I don't think I'm going to be there much longer. But when I did my research, it was with my own people. And one of the things that I had, and our allies, and one of the things I discovered that was so extraordinary to me, how you can live in such a tight-knit community and think you know your people, but if you don't create the space to talk about certain issues, you really don't know what they're thinking. And what inspired me to do a lot of this work is because of my experience of sitting at formal tables where there was negotiations and so forth taking place. These concepts of Indigenous rights, treaty rights, and so forth were taken on a very neoliberal, state-driven definition. So I wanted to find out, what do my own people think? And it was an extraordinary journey that fundamentally changed my life. And they brought me right down to basics. I start out with fishing, but I go on a moose hunt, which is a big, huge animal here that we eat. And it fundamentally changed my life and really helped me to pursue what are Indigenous women's ways of knowing. How do we teach that? How is that intergenerational? And just as Joyashree was saying, was you know, all those, I hate using this term, but I know what she means when she says it's informal, those informal activities that so often get ignored, that uphold people, that are working behind the scenes to contribute to their community's health and the holistic survival of their community. So to just quickly state, I think we need to create more spaces to have those conversations, just like this is a virtual space to have that conversation. And I'm quite honored to be here to create that space, because I'm finding more and more those spaces are being enclosed or stopped or silenced.
Yeah.
Wow, that was an
Yeah,
amazing answer.
I just add one more thing, this is true for Indigenous community. This is also true for any local community, When I have been working with the scientists and the engineers and the society, going to the society that why they have discarded all the technologies which were previously given to them to access the arsenic safe water, we found that societies know very well where the technology lacks and where it does not respond to the societal need. I'll just give one small example. When we were building our modern infrastructure for them, because first thing we realized that they do not want poor man's technology. They want a modern technology. They want to live, they have the aspiration of living a better life like you and me, right? So we wanted to honor that, and we wanted to develop that technology. And then it is a hot country, right? So what happened was that when we were doing the water connection from the to the pipe to the tap where they will take the water and the water tank, we were doing it like any other, which is on the walls and going to the water pipeline. And in the summer, so the people said that if you do this, you are making it wrong, because it will give us all hot water for drinking, which we do not want. What we want is a cold water, but I do not want a cooler, but you can make it cold if you put the pipeline under the ground. They knew better than the engineers. They knew better than this. And then we actually respected that. And we took it out, and then we made it under, and we could see that 4 degrees water cooling happens if you take the under the ground. And that was a learning for the engineers, So listening to the local people, because they have that local knowledge, which we do not have when we go from out as outsider. So including the voices for people, honoring them equal to us is extremely important. It's not us and them. It's all of us together. And that's a real learning. And that makes us humble to when we respond to the community. And that's why I feel the scientists really need to go and walk through the local communities to understand their plight, to make the solutions.
Yeah, if I can just add, just to echo what has already been said, that's also what we saw in the work that we did, that the women in these communities, were not working in silo, right? They knew that in order to see improvements in their livelihood and their health and the health and well-being of their children, etc., they needed to not lose sight of and demand protection of the water resources and other natural resources in their community. And so they worked, from a kind of a comprehensive and holistic approach to advance the well-being of their communities. You don't see that, at the global level. We have folks talking about, conservation and about, the kind of the hard sciences. Over here, you have folks working on gender equality over here and working in silo. But actually, if you talk to folks, on the ground, the grassroots folks are already doing this, and they know that there's a connection and you can't do these things separately. And so if we were just listening more to these, this evidence and this knowledge that already exists, I think we would be farther along in terms of the SDGs and the implementation of the SDGs, to be perfectly honest.
I think that is a phenomenal way to wrap up today's conversation. I truly want to thank you all so much for this fantastic discussion. We really appreciate your time that you put into today and sharing your expertise with everyone here. There you go. I think the audience agrees with that sentiment as well. So thank you guys. I really appreciate also you guys stayed along extra time, and to you audience as well. Thank you for sticking around with us a little bit extra today. It was very much a needed conversation to be had. So thank you again to everybody. The Women Plus Water community, as Corin mentioned earlier, continues to grow and be impactful because of all of us. So our next Women Plus Water conversation will be held on February 8th. It's going to be about discussing water as a key ingredient for women and girls' nutrition. And we have another phenomenal lineup of guests and hosts coming up. So please register on our Women Plus Water website, and we look forward to seeing you guys again next month. And of course, I'd like to thank all the people who are behind the scenes that make this possible. Of course, Dr. Corin Schuster-Wallace, who's been spearheading this for the last 5-6 years now. And then Jessie Widow, thank you for running the technical behind this. And of course, the College of Arts and Science, and specifically Tara Hackle, who's been our contact there, who's been a dear supporter of this so far this year. So thank you everybody for joining us, and we hope to see you guys again next month. And thank you guests and hosts. You guys did a phenomenal job today. We really appreciate it.